And that, I reckon, is the first step to being a happy, helpful and hopeful people, is realizing that the game is rigged in your favor and what Jesus has started, he has guaranteed to finish. Hey, it's cool to be out here. It's a little bit different, isn't it? I was really worried it would be too hot out here in the sun, but if anything, it's the opposite. We've got this like freezing wind coming through, so I did pray for it to be cool, but obviously my prayers are too effective, so make sure I back off the prayer a little bit next time. Thanks for coming out here. It's a little bit different to be here, but it's sometimes good for a change. We're actually here for the next 4 weeks, all right? So 4 weeks out here. It's going to be really hot next time, I promise you. It's probably too hot, and then we'll get it right the next 2 weeks after that. So, it's going to be really good. Yeah, but sometimes a change is good. Sometimes a change can be hard. I'm actually preaching on change today. We're starting a brand new series, and we're talking about actually how change is one of the hardest parts of life. I'm just going to do a quick survey, I guess, and everyone involved, including kids, you guys can get involved in this too. But I want to see how much change that this group of people have been through, all right? So put your hand up if you've ever had to change houses, if you ever had to move house. All right? Almost all of us. Okay, put your hand up if you ever had to move schools. So, like whether that's a big deal, so that's a big change. Okay, hand up if you had to move states. Anyone? Oh, look at all you dirty Southerners and Westerners. Kidding. Hands up if you ever had to move countries. You actually had to move the country that you were living. Wow. Okay. That's pretty cool too. Okay, hands up if you ever had to, what's a good one? Ever had to change your diet because of health reasons or something like that? There's a few kids with their hands up. Could just be to the COVID-10 that we've all put on. Some of you need to change your diet. Put your hand up if you've ever had your life severely changed by some kind of illness and you had to kind of change how things were living in your life. Yeah, lots of people. Yeah. Change can be really fun sometimes. It can be exciting, but I reckon most of the time we don't like change. Most of the time people don't like change. They find it difficult. They find it hard to deal with. And I was actually saying this to someone the other day and they said, no, Dan, you got it wrong. I said, people hate change. And they said, no, people love change. They hate loss. Like if I gave you $1 million tomorrow, that'd be a big change. That'd change your life. But you wouldn't be too stressed about it, would you? You wouldn't be too worried about it because it isn't a loss. What we're actually afraid of with change is losing, is having our way of life taken away from us, our freedom's gone, our protection's gone, our sense of, we're going somewhere's gone, those we love gone. That's actually what we're worried about when it comes to change. I still remember a pastor friend of mine a few years back. I actually went to school with him. I went to this school. He was in my grade at school and he's a pastor, and I was sitting in the hospital with my wife Steph and him, and he was just saying how he's just got the diagnosis he might never walk again, and he hasn't ever been able to walk again, and because of this awful virus which is actually in his spinal cord. And he was just trying to deal with the fact that what does this change mean for the rest of my life? Like, how do you deal with a change like that? The worst kind of change, and the kids will relate to this one, the worst type of change is the change that is forced upon you. And as a kid, everything's forced upon you. Like, we changed Zeke's school a while ago. So he went from Northlake State School to Mueller College. A few of you might have heard of that school. And it was a good change, we reckon. But he didn't have any choice. We pretended he did. We were like, hey, Zeke, do you want to move schools? You're going to like it? But he actually had no choice. As a kid, your whole life's like that. But even as an adult, you probably realise very quickly, a lot of your life is kind of forced upon you and you can't change it. We're actually in a culture right now that's changing quicker than any culture has ever changed in history. Did you know that? Like, things are changing before your very eyes. Some of the more, wise elderly people here will have seen quite a lot of change in their lives. I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but you've seen some change, haven't you? Steph and I were actually celebrating 14 years married in 4 days on the 30th. So thank you, yep. And we were just talking the other day going, man, how much has the world changed even since we got married? Like in 14 years. That's not a huge amount of time, but in 14 years, the world's absolutely shifted completely. 14 years ago, would you believe they didn't have smartphones? And now people spend, on average, get this, an average Australian spends 31 hours a week on their phone. That's like an almost full-time job on their phone. Like, that's a huge change. That's changed the way we live. There was no Facebook. Well, barely anyone had Facebook. Our wedding photos didn't go on Facebook because it wasn't around back then. Some of you are like, wow, there was no Facebook? Yes. Values were different. John Howard was the PM. George Bush was the president. This is going back a while, but it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And what people saw as good and as valuable and what people saw as evil and disgusting, that's shifted even in 14 years. And friends, let me tell you, this is going to freak some of you out, but it's going to shift again in another 14 years. We're going to be celebrating 28 years of marriage one day, and we're going to be going, wow, look how much the world's changed again. In 10 years' time, it's predicted no one's going to have a smartphone. Apple's putting billions of dollars of research right now into something called augmented reality, which will be something you wear on your body that will project the images that you need to see, and the audio will go into your ear. Some of you guys are really freaked out right now, aren't you? But that's what change always feels like. It's really worrying. And our natural reaction, and I've got the same thing, thinking about augmented reality, our natural reaction to change is fear, stress, anger, worry, concern, protectionism, bunkering down. This is what we naturally experience. And I've seen this so much in the last 2 years, because obviously we've experienced more change in the last 2 years than we have in decades before that. Imagine if someone could come and tell you 2 years ago, you have to wear a mask when you go inside and you're not allowed to leave Queensland. Like, what would you say to them? You'd be like, not a chance. That's crazy. And yet here we are. Rapid change. And so, of course, we've seen in our culture what happens when you force that kind of change upon people. We've seen anger. We've seen fear. We've seen protectionism. We've seen terror. We've seen all this kinds of stuff going on. We've seen people attacking each other. And it's really sad. So, is there an alternative when change is upon us? So all throughout history, there's been this remnant of people, there's been this really small group of people called Jesus followers that have somehow, when all the world's changed around them, like the Roman Empire fell, that's a pretty big change, a bit bigger than COVID, during a plague, during the changing of our entire culture, during world wars, during the Great Depression, through these absolutely just catalytic changes, there's been this group of people that have remained three things. And this is what our series is called. They've been able to stay happy, they've been able to stay helpful, and they've been able to stay hopeful. And that's really all we're talking about over the next 4 weeks. How do we become, if you're a Jesus follower today, all right, how do we become those three things? How do we really regain the original melody of Christianity, of following Jesus, which is a people marked by three things? I want you to say it with me, okay? Happy. That's good. I love the audience interaction. Keeps you awake. Helpful. And hopeful. All right, that's the three things that mark us. So we're just going to be looking at, and I'm just going to look at really quickly right now in closing, the book of Philippians. Philippians is a letter written by a dude named the Apostle Paul, who was going through ridiculous change. He was a church planter. He was a very influential dude. He was going all around the known world, planting churches and preaching the gospel. Some people have said he's the most influential person of all time, because, I don't know about that, but that's a pretty big call, because he actually took the message of Jesus not just to Jews, but he took it to all the non-Jewish world and literally basically changed the entire world. And his life had changed, because when he goes to write this letter, he's actually in jail. He's in a lockdown, and it's worse than Melbourne's lockdown, if you can believe that. He's not allowed out of jail. He's not allowed out of kind of house arrest. He's basically in prison. He's no longer been able to go out there preaching the gospel. He's stuck. And it looks like they're actually going to kill him. That's a pretty big change, yeah? Pretty big change in his life. I think things were going, he was out there doing stuff, and suddenly he's going to get killed and he's in prison. And he writes a letter to a church that's very stressed out. And I imagine how stressed out you would be if they were going to kill me. Yeah? Some of you at least get a nod. Nothing? Okay. But basically their leader has been put in jail. They're really freaked out. They're like, one, what's going to happen to Paul? One, what's going to happen to the leadership now? And what happens when Paul dies? And they're really stressed about this stuff. And Paul writes a letter to them, and it's not the letter you'd think. If I was in jail writing a letter to people and things were looking bad, I wouldn't write this letter. I would write a letter that said this: Dear church, things are looking bad. I'm terrified. I'm really worried. The government's evil. They're trying to kill me. Please help me. It's dark times. Be careful out there. It's dark days. That's what I would write. And he doesn't write that at all. Let me just read you. This is Philippians 1. Let me just read you what Paul says. This is just a few verses from verse 12 to 21, Philippians 1. This is Paul's version of the letter. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. And now they're thinking, yeah, but all very well for you, Paul. Okay, but what about the leadership? There's all these people going out there, they're preaching weird stuff. They're preaching for the wrong motives. He says, all right, it's true that some preach Christ. There's like a leadership vacuum, obviously, out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, I will continue to rejoice. For I know that your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me, will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Is that a surprising response? When you're locked up in jail about to be killed and the world seems like it's pretty evil and dark and they're going to turn against Christians. Actually, that's pretty surprising. Like he's actually saying, man, I'm joyful. Man, I'm hopeful. And anything they're trying to do against me, is actually God's going to use it for good. And he already is. How good is this? He's actually really happy. He says, I'm going to rejoice. Now, I'm sure it's really tough as well. There's lots of times when Paul's kind of crying and he's really worried. But here he's actually saying, no, I'm going to be happy. He's helpful. He's actually trying to help the church. He's not just sitting there crying. He's like, no, I'm going to write a letter to help you guys. And he's hopeful. He's like, this is all working out for the good. This is fantastic. How did Paul become like that? That's the kind of person I want to be. Is that the kind of person you want to be? Person that when things go wrong to you, you actually get happier and more helpful and more hopeful? How did Paul become someone like that? Well, the good news is that the Bible's not full of really good people that have it all together. When we first meet Paul, he is a terrified guy. He's so worried and so terrified about what these Jesus people are going to do to his religion and his way of life. He's so worried about losing, he's going around killing everyone and chucking them in jail. That's just how scared Paul was, okay? So, something changed. What changed? He met Jesus. Here's what he says. This is the reason. He says this. Being confident of this is in verse 6, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. Friends, here's what Paul is saying to the church in Philippians. And here's what God, I believe, is saying to you today. Church, the game is rigged in your favor. The game's rigged. You literally can't lose because Jesus is on your team, and what he started in you, he's going to finish. He started a project in you, and Jesus has never, ever dropped a project. Jesus is not like me. I drop projects all the time. I have about 5 projects for every one, 5 ideas for every one completed project. Is anyone here like me that they struggle to finish projects? I've got about 10 things around the house that's almost, I'll get to one day. Yes. Guess what? Jesus is not like that. What he started in you, what he started in this church at Life Point, what he started in the whole capital C church throughout the world, he will finish, he will bring to completion. And there's no obstacle that's going to get in the way. Nothing the government does, nothing that happens in your life, no sickness, no illness, nothing a person does to you, nothing that you keep doing to yourself even is going to stop God as part of the community bringing, because remember, Paul's talking to a whole church here, bringing to completion what he began in you. It's easy for Jesus. Paul's like, nothing's going to stop this working. Even the biggest change of all, even if they kill me, he says, even if they change my heart from beating to not beating, that's a big change. Even that, I'd be all right with. I still wouldn't lose because God can't lose. The game is rigged. I was watching the steeplechase this Olympics. Gee, that's a good event. What a strange event that is. It's like someone took the 3,000 metre race and went, yeah, it's a bit boring. What if they had like stuff to jump over? It's like, oh yeah, like a hurdle. It's like, no, not like a little hurdle, like a big hurdle, and then has water on the other side. And I was watching this, so I'm like, this is going to be like the first time I ever watched it. I'm like, this is going to be such a good event. But do you know what happened? As I'm watching these ridiculous athletes. I'm like, what are they going to do? There's water on the track. How are they going to handle water on the track? These ridiculously fit people, they just go, have you seen what they do? They jump onto the hurdle, then leap off the hurdle, and they just clear it. Like, it was so boring. Like, why can't at least one person just go flat on their face? Not one person did. And they barely got their feet wet. That's what Paul is saying. Life is like when you've got Jesus on your side. Yeah, there'll be obstacles. Yeah, they'll look stressful. Like, you can't get more stressful than being locked in prison and going to die. Turns out Paul really did die. You can't get more stressful and worrying than that. And yet here he was. To live is Christ. To live would be awesome. And to die, even that is gain. The game is rigged in your favour. And that, I reckon, is the first step to being a happy, helpful and hopeful people, is realising that the game is rigged in your favour. In what Jesus has started, he has guaranteed to finish. Amen.